Monsieur le Président de la République, mes chers amis, d'abord, un très grand merci à vous tous d'être là, présents pour ce moment que je crois historique. Monsieur le Président de la République, c'est un immense honneur et une réelle joie pour moi de vous accueillir au premier forum d'Internet et du numérique précédant une réunion du G8. Dans quelques instants, vous allez officiellement ouvrir ce forum dont vous avez pris l'initiative. Vous avez voulu qu'Internet soit inscrit à l'ordre du jour du G8, qui se réunit dans 2 jours à Deauville, sous votre présidence. Vous avez souhaité que les acteurs de l'Internet, que toutes ces parties prenantes, puissent s'exprimer, débattre de façon ouverte et libre, et que les conclusions de ces débats soient portées à la connaissance des chefs d'État du G8. Vous avez souhaité, en d'autres termes, que ce forum soit tenu à l'image de la manière dont Internet fonctionne, c'est-à-dire ouvert, participatif et, pour tout dire, libre. Ce sera le cas, soyez-en persuadés. J'ai été particulièrement sensible à l'honneur que vous m'avez fait de me confier la responsabilité de l'organisation de ce forum. C'est avec une grande fierté que je vois l'Assemblée réunie aujourd'hui. Malgré des délais extrêmement brefs et des calendriers chargés, tous les grands acteurs sont présents, à de rares exceptions près. Ils ont bouleversé leurs agendas pour répondre à votre invitation. Je crois pouvoir dire que tous ont bien compris l'importance des enjeux et l'intérêt de cette rencontre. Je ne prendrai ni le temps ni le risque de citer les personnalités présentes.
Far too afraid of offending someone by not naming them, but there are more than 1,500 people who have enlisted to participate in the discussion. And might I add that all the players of the digital ecosystem are represented here. The infrastructures, the computer, server, telecommunication, e-commerce, startup companies today and tomorrow are present here. They're all of them here. There are even people from the advertising world, alongside also academics and members of civil society, in order to talk about the digital era and its impact on our economies and our societies. Although there have been many such fora, none has focused specifically on enlightening heads of state. And that was your initiative, sir. And that is why I've said that this is a historic meeting, because in 2 days' time in Deauville, there will be a summit where the heads of state and government of the 8 largest industrialized countries will be discussing under your presidency and at your behest specific issues pertaining to the internet ecosystem, which is developing at an unprecedented pace. Historic also because the sector is indeed a world sector. Almost 2 billion people are connected to internet. In other words, 1 out of 3 of the world's inhabitants. 3 billion people have cell phones, in other words, half of the world's population. And you know better than anyone, sir, that internet has erased borders and frontiers, and that there is no area, be it in culture, innovation, technology, trade, the economy, or communication, that is not affected by internet. In other words, we're talking about life here. And what makes these 2 days so special is the very convening of this forum, the fact that the economic and social protagonists of this sector, the content creators, members of civil society, the inventors, are the ones who are participating, or be they bloggers, be they novices in this field, or be they great names. It is up to them to discuss freely, to exchange their views, and to put forward ideas, new ideas. This is a great honor, and I'm sure that they will be up to the challenge. This is a historic moment, and therefore we have a historic responsibility. Because, of course, it would be easy to use this opportunity simply to roll out cliches. But the questions that we have to think about are things like, how is Internet going to be used to create more wealth, growth, employment, and freedom? How to go further, and also how to be more respectful of others, of their private lives, and how to strike the right balance between the sharing of value, the responsibilities that come with freedom, new freedoms. We have convened a number of workshops, and all participants will be invited to take part in these workshops to come up with novel and different ideas. If we want this forum to be a success, we must put this question in very sincere, humble terms, with a strong sense of responsibility in our ability to come up with fresh, responsible ideas. This, sir, is why we are here at your initiative. So as you see, we have a lot to do in order to ensure that this forum is indeed a true success. Of course, everything will not be solved in a matter of 2 days, far from it. But I remain convinced that we have a historic opportunity to push Internet forward, roll it forward. Mr. President, my dear friends, there's a great quote of Albert Einstein's that I'm very fond of, which is, imagination is more important than knowledge. Of course, Einstein would have adored Internet. It is the fruit of man's imagination, but by the same token, it is a forum for sharing knowledge, accessible to all of mankind. Here we have a lot of knowledge about Internet, but we are also going to have to mobilize our imagination in order to collectively see how Internet is going to be developing in tomorrow's world. Thank you to all of you. And with no further ado, and I apologize for having been so lengthy, I wish now to give the floor to the President, Mr. Nicolas Sarkozy, President of the French Republic and President of the G8, so that he inaugurate this G8 forum. And the President has been kind enough to, after his speech, answer a few of your questions.
Merci. Mesdames et messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen, history always remembers those places, those fora where, at a given moment in time, all the creative forces of an era seem to wish to converge. Thus, I have wanted to bring you here to Paris, just before the opening of the G8 summit. It is an important moment because, to my knowledge, it is the very first time that all those who, through their talent, have contributed to changing the world. I should have said, have contributed to make us change the world. The only time when all of you have been brought together in the same forum. France and the G8 has the honor of welcoming men and women whose name is attached to the emergence of a new form of civilization. If we know how to listen to one another, how to hear one another, if we know how to discuss and listen to one another, then I am convinced that this G8 will take on a truly historic dimension. It will enable our era to become aware of what it really is about and to move on from fantastic individual adventures to a phenomenal collective story. Our world has already experienced 2 globalizations. The first was that of the great discoveries, where we basically had a world which we understood, which we could chart, which Magellan could tour. The second globalization, that of the Industrial Revolutions, enabled us to tame the world, sometimes even to enslave it. But this is the third globalization, that which you are driving and of which you are the promoters. And you have changed the perception that the world has of itself. You have changed the very notion of space, because Internet doesn't simply abolish the distance between individuals, but it opens up a virtual world which by definition is limitless. A world where we can each be in touch and in contact with one another. A world in which we can build our own territory, our own community, even our own society. You have changed our very notion of time by abolishing the very notion of time. There is an immediacy that gives individuals the possibility of accessing others, information, and a host of possibilities. You have changed the very perception, our perception of history, because although transparency can be challenged in terms of its methods and its effects, nonetheless, transparency is a fact that our states have had to come to terms with. You have changed the relationship between things and objects through dematerialization. You have changed what knowledge actually means by making it possible for everyone to access knowledge, and not simply access knowledge, but contribute to knowledge. The dream of a universal library which would contain all the knowledge of the world, this dream, which is as old as antiquity, can now, at long last, become a reality. In a few years, you have shaken the very foundations of a world economy of which you have become major players. You have changed the world. For me, you have changed the world in the same way that Columbus and Galileo did. You have changed the world in the same way that Newton and Edison did. You have changed the world with the imagination of inventors and the audacity of entrepreneurs. What is unique, and this is unique in history, is this total revolution. And the fact that this total revolution is irremediably and immediately a global revolution. What is unique in history is that this revolution belongs to nobody. It has no flag. It has no slogan. This revolution is a common good. And what is unique in history is that this revolution was a non-violent one. The discovery of the New World led to the annihilation of Amerindian civilizations. The world revolution that you stand for has been a peaceful one. It was not born on battlefields, but on university campuses. It emerged from the miraculous combination of science and culture, of determination to understand and to know and to pass on that knowledge. Now, the mythology of your sector claims that Google was born in a garage. Well, I happen to believe that Google was born in a university library. Hollywood claims that Facebook was the result of unrequited love. But attractive as that may be, what strikes me is that Facebook was born on a university campus, and a very high-level university at that. This revolution, which has changed our perception of time and space, has played a key role in other revolutions. In Tunisia, just as in Egypt, simple individuals were able to shake the very foundations of a power that had lost credibility by building virtual barricades and very real demonstrations. The Arab peoples have thus shown the world that internet does not belong to states or governments, and international opinion has been able to witness the fact that internet had become, in terms of freedom of expression, the driving force of unbelievable strength and power. Just like any revolution, the technological and cultural revolution that you have begun holds out a promise, a huge promise. And that is what you stand for. This revolution has reached its first stage of maturity, but it should not forget what its original promises were. You have, of course, designed the tools that you now use and that you have shared with others. But you did so because you were yourselves dreaming of a more open world. And if you have built the social networks that have brought you here today and that have brought together millions of men and women, it's because of you dreamt of a more fraternal world. And you have fleshed out this utopia because you believed in humankind and the future of humankind. And if you have been so successful worldwide, it is because your promise is based on universal values. Your action, therefore, is part of our history with a capital H, is part of the driving force of our civilization. Whence the level of your responsibility, because you have a tremendous responsibility that weighs upon you. Our responsibility as heads of state and government is no less than yours. We have to accompany a revolution which was born within the very heart of civil society, for civil society, and that has a direct impact on the lives of our states and governments. Because although technology in and of itself is neutral and must remain so, the way internet is used is not neutral. And to think about internet and recognize the importance of internet is a historical responsibility. And this responsibility has to be shared between you and us. For states and governments, members of the G8, in other words, some of the world's most powerful countries, we must recognize the important role that you are playing in the march of history. We want to listen to your expertise, your know-how. We have things to understand and things to learn in the same way as individuals and companies has seized the opportunities that you and internet represent. We wish to do so as well. How can we use internet in order to strengthen democracy, social dialogue, solidarity? How can we use internet in order to improve the effectiveness of the way our governments function? How can we give to our governments this spirit of innovation, this entrepreneurial spirit that is the characteristic of your sector? These are the questions that we wish to put to you. And we want to also tell you that the universe that you represent is not a parallel universe which is free of the rules of law or ethics or of any of the fundamental principles that must govern and do govern the social lives of our democratic states. For as long as internet is part and parcel of the daily life of our citizens, it would be a contradiction to leave governments out of this massive and major discussion. No one should forget that governments in our democracies are the only legitimate representatives of their citizens. To forget that would be to take the risk of creating democratic chaos and therefore anarchy. To forget that would be to confuse populism and democracy. The juxtaposition of individual determinations has never equated the will of the majority. And therefore, democratic governments have something to say on the subject. So, ladies and gentlemen, be faithful to the promises of the revolution you have set in motion. The market, of course, has its own regulation mechanisms, but no trade, no exchange is truly free and fair if the terms of this trade, of this exchange, are unfair. Do not allow new barriers to be erected, to be raised where you have torn down the walls of an older world. Do not let new monopolies emerge where older ones have been dismantled. By giving each and every individual the opportunity to have his or her voice heard, you have promoted the cause of the right to express oneself freely in a way that had never been done up until now. This fantastic progress is a real revolution. And do not allow this revolution that you have launched in any way affect or undermine privacy and the private lives of individuals. Total transparency, that which does not let people lead their lives in peace, will ultimately come up against the notion of individual freedom. Do not forget that behind the anonymous internet user, there is a real citizen living in a real society, a real culture, and a nation to which he or she belongs with its laws and its rules. Do not forget that it is in the commitment and through the commitment of your corporations and companies, that you will be able to contribute fairly and freely to national ecosystems. Do not let the technology that you have created affect the freedom of the elementary rights of children to live and to be protected from the indecencies of certain adults. Do not let this revolution that you have launched become an instrument in the hands of those who wish to undermine our security and our integrity. You have enabled everyone, thanks to the very magic of the web, to access with a simple click the huge cultural wealth of this world. It would be paradoxical that this web contribute also to drying up this cultural wealth. This immense cultural wealth, which is the pride of our civilizations, we owe to the creative power of our artists, of authors and thinkers. They must not be despoiled of the fruit of their talent. That doesn't simply ruin them, but far worse, it enslaves them. They lose their autonomy and their freedom. And I say this thinking of a Frenchman who died 2 centuries ago, who with a single play shook the very foundations of an almost 1,000-year-old monarchy. A man who, with Lafayette, was one of the first defenders of American independence. And I'm thinking of Beaumarchais. This is the man who invented the principle, the very principle of copyright. And by doing that, he guaranteed the independence of creators, of writers, of thinkers. He gave them their freedom. Now, I know that our French approach to authors' rights or copyright is not the same as that which prevails in the United States or other countries. I simply want to say that we are deeply attached to universal principles, those that are enshrined in the American Constitution or in the Declaration of Human Rights of 1789. Nobody can or should be despoiled or expropriated vis-à-vis the fruits of their ideas, their work, their imagination, their intellectual property. And it's important that I say this to you, because before you became entrepreneurs, you were creators. And it is by virtue of this fact that you were able to set up companies which for some of you have become empires. Those algorithms which are your strength, this constant innovation, which is your force, this technology that changes the world is your property. And therefore, no one is challenging that. Therefore, you must be able to understand that writers, film directors, performers should be entitled to the same rights. These are creators who must get fair value and retribution for their ideas and their talents. States and governments invest in the training of those who join, whom you recruit into your companies. States and governments invest in the technical infrastructures that enable content and services to circulate freely on the web. Therefore, the states and governments I'm talking about wish to enter into dialogue with you so that we can defend one another's interests. We are coming out, we are emerging from a horrific crisis, which was the fruit of the blind determination to sacrifice all for money. Powers who shook off their responsibilities, who did not wish to enter into dialogue with elected governments. So all I'm doing is launching an appeal and calling for collective responsibility. What I am calling for is for everyone to be reasonable. We believe in the same values. I remain convinced that there is a way forward. it is possible that together we tread this path in the general interest of a world which has become global, thanks to you, largely. So let us have this indispensable dialogue. And I wish to thank you, because when I had the idea of convening this forum, everyone said to me, it was a bad idea. Except for Maurice Lévy, when I asked him to convene it and to organize it and put it together. The first who thought it was a bad idea were my colleagues, heads of state and government, who said once again, Nicolas, you're taking risks. You're taking too many risks. And I think the worst risk you can take is not to take any risk. The worst risk is not to enter into dialogue and not to talk to one another. And I think that you never take a risk when you appeal to people's intelligence. The intelligence of the world you represent, of which you are the incarnation. You may think, well, what have we to do with heads of state and government? Well, I think we have a lot to do together. We have a lot to say to one another. And on Thursday, I will be delighted to hear a delegation from this e-forum enter into a real dialogue with heads of state and government. We need this dialogue. We need to understand your constraints, your aspirations, your needs. And you need to hear what our limits are, what our red lines are, the sort of problems that we have to deal with in the name of the general interest. In a nutshell, I am so happy to see you here in Paris, and I would be even happier if a forum of this nature could become a habit. In other words, could be convened every year before the G8 summit, so that we understand where you stand and you know what we think. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, it's worked out. You said, why not hold this every year before the G8? Certainly, as far as I see it, I certainly accept to take on that challenge. I hope my friends will also accept to take on that challenge. Now, we're going to move on to a brief Q&A session. Maybe I'll start with a question that pretty much comes out of the various things we've seen on the internet over the past 3 weeks. Bloggers, people on Twitter, people on Facebook have been talking about this. They've been saying things, and basically what they've said is the following. You wanted for there to be discussion of Internet at G8. And there were 2 reactions to that idea. Some people said, that's great, that's wonderful, it's fantastic. At long last, head of state is interested, and heads of state and government of the most industrialized countries are going to be looking at this industry, which is part of their daily lives and which is very, very important. And then there's a second kind of reaction that we've been seeing. Some people have said, no, this is certainly not possible. They're not going to get involved with that. I mean, what might they end up doing if they get involved? How do you react to those comments? What are your views of what the people on the internet have been saying? You know, people on the internet, when they're distrustful, when they're worried, concerned, when they're afraid, they act like any citizen does, who by definition, whenever initiative's being taken, is going to express some reluctance. You know, one of the first problems in our democratic societies is people's lack of trust. But if, as head of state, I were only to take initiatives if people were happy, pleased with them, when people are confident, honestly, I wouldn't be able to do anything at all. I could just relax all day long in any area whatsoever. And especially when we're talking about this new world, the internet. I really felt we needed to move forward, go beyond this artificial wall of distrust. You know, you can't have on one hand virtual society, on the other hand real society. It's the self-same people in both of those societies at differing times in their lives, but they're expressing themselves sometimes on the internet or sometimes in real life. So I thought we need to discuss these various matters. When your evolution is reaching a stage of maturity, the question is, what arrangements do you need for further encouragement? What type of tax arrangements? What types of minimal rules would you accept or reject? The question I'm so interested in has to do with freedom of creation. You're creative people. How is that compensated? IP, intellectual property rights. How do we address this issue? A question of monopoly. How do we settle this question of monopolies? So, Maurice, Lévy, if heads of state and government just stayed amongst themselves with their discussions, they have experience with election campaigns, less experience in the internet. And that's where you'd be really exposed. Whereas if we're closer to you, if we're listening to you, trying to get a fuller understanding, as I've tried to get a fuller understanding of these issues here in France, becoming very interested in the internet, which I wasn't that familiar with, and seeing it from the outside. All of a sudden now, I see entrepreneurs that are like other entrepreneurs, other business people. I see men and women who are creative people, who are no outlaws, who are generating economic growth, and who want to be in a world with values that are universal values. Why should we be distrustful? What risk would we be taking? Do you think that everybody would lose their identity because they've come to have discussions with heads of state and government? No, it's precisely the opposite. During any revolution, you know, in the initial stage of maturity after a revolution, it's like people who start something, build a tunnel. It then needs to be shored up, prepared for the second stage, move on to the next stage, so above and beyond questions of image. I believe there is no risk whatsoever in taking this initiative. Now, it wasn't easy to get this for heads of state and government to find time to be able to talk about the internet. You know, we've got Japan, an unprecedented nuclear crisis there. We've got changes in the Arab world. We've got the financial crisis. We've got global growth that needs to be underpinned. We have so many subjects on our agenda, and yet, nonetheless, I really felt this would be an important demonstration of recognition of your importance, of your influence. I believe it's never a mistake when you call on your partner's sense of responsibility. So, to be honest, I wasn't really worried about these expressions of distrust. It just showed me that I was right in deciding to organize the G8.
Yeah. S'il y avait eu un
If there had been a basic consensus, you probably would have not decided to do it. Let's move on to the first question.
Non, attendez. OK. Où est la première question?
First question, please.
Voilà.
Bonjour, Jonathan Benamou.
Jonathan Benamou. Mr. President, digital world, every day it gets stronger and stronger, and we see that it's very important, having an impact on the way global economies are organized. How do you think governments can accompany this overall movement, this overall process, so that the digital world, so that the digital aspect can actually generate economic growth? That's no easy question. Firstly, to be truthful, we've tried to keep up with things. We've tried to fully understand exactly what was going on. Think of the breadth of change, the tremendous change that's taken place in terms of your relationship with the citizenry and relationship with consumers. There are two things that are fairly easy to do, sort of conventional things. Firstly, investing in infrastructure, digital infrastructure. In France, we decided to earmark 4.5 billion euros because without infrastructure investment, regardless of how ingenious you may all be, there's no possible contact between the various millions of people on the internet and you. Secondly, we decided to substantially strengthen our education system. And I'd use the opportunity to say that for the first time in our history, our universities are now autonomous. So we're investing in infrastructure and education, and we're investing on a very large scale. But it goes much further than that. With the arrival of the digital world, we see we've got to change our behavior. Let me just use one example of this: transparency. For quite some time, I felt that in government management, there are no secrets anymore. Everybody knows everything. And with the arrival of the internet, everyone knows everything immediately. Now, that makes a huge change in the way we manage our governments, our states. My point here is that our responsiveness has had to speed up tremendously, because any decision we make is immediately known globally. Any discussion is known about immediately and globally. Any economic commitment has repercussions in all countries. And I'm convinced that a head of state who was head of state 10 years ago, who were to become a head of state again today, 10 years down the road, would no longer really recognize the forum, everything that's involved in managing a government. And this is the whole purpose of our discussions. We're trying to use this as an opportunity, use this leverage, this tremendous potential for growth that you all represent. In other words, we're trying not to take any measure that would reduce that potential for economic growth and use as inspiration various arrangements that have bolstered growth. And we haven't gotten there yet. And I think all my colleagues, heads of state and government, agree. We are listening. We are on the lookout. We are gaining intelligence. We're wondering about the decisions to be made. For instance, in France, we decided to establish a national digital council. And I've agreed with the main players of the internet in France that the government would enact no decision without, first of all, getting their opinion. We may disagree, but initially, we will hear their opinion. And in exchange, in return, they've said they would accept dialogue and they would accept to shoulder their responsibility. So I can't give you one final answer to your question. Maybe in 1 year's time, I could give you a more specific answer. But now, really, I think we're getting to know each other. There are these two worlds. We're trying to bring them together without losing your youth, without using your leverage, your momentum, but at the same time, you'll understand that you cannot not adhere to, I don't know if people don't like this word, but you have to adhere to some minimum values or rules. That's the meeting point. That's the balance we're trying to strike together. So let me say, we're talking about keeping everything you're contributing, maintaining all of that, but at the same time understanding you've got to have a minimum foundation of rules, values that mustn't prevent your development, but which will make it possible for us together to continue moving toward greater economic growth.
Bonjour, Jean-François.
Morning, Jean-François from Reporters Sans Frontières, Reporters Without Borders. You said yourself that everybody realizes the importance of the internet in the Arab Revolution starting in Tunisia. Now, a lot of bloggers haven't felt as much support as they would have liked to have from France. Dozens of bloggers in Bahrain, Syria, Libya are in prison, and in Yemen as well. What's France doing for them? What, in the future, could France do for the cyber dissidents? Do you think that in the future, defending a free internet would be a weapon of diplomacy used by democratic countries? Thank you for the question. There's just one thing I disagree on. I don't believe it began in Tunisia. We mustn't forget Iran and internet bloggers there. And it wasn't because they were not successful that, just understand my words, the internet revolution in Iran unfortunately didn't pan out, didn't lead to the departure of their leader, but they began the process. The role of the Internet in Iran was very substantial indeed. I very much hope that in the future Iranians will also be entitled to live free. Secondly, freedom of the Internet. Clearly, that is an important criterion now. The question is whether we're talking about a democracy or dictatorship. Now, that's the early sign of a democracy or dictatorship, whether or not the Internet is free. That's really the dividing line. All the people who wanted to shut off their country's Internet, close it off, are really on the side of the dictators. You say we haven't done enough. You're allowed to think that. But to speak very frankly to you, I would say that the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia, we were surprised when it began. I certainly admit to that. Let me say worldwide, who was not surprised? I'm not using that as some sort of excuse, but we did draw some conclusions from that. We changed France's policy in this respect. Previously, to be frank, on both the left and the right, all foreign policy was organized based on stability. That was the key word. So in the name of stability, we would prefer 2 Germanys instead of 1 in the past. For the sake of stability, 80 million Europeans were on the other side of the Berlin Wall. For the sake of stability, we tolerated dictatorships. Things have changed because the Arab peoples have taken charge of their destiny. And that had a big impact on the decision I made to step in the Ivory Coast so that the Ivorians' will, their democratic will, should triumph. Also, intervention in Libya. If we hadn't intervened in Libya, Benghazi was being destroyed by a tyrant. The situation in Syria is unacceptable. So henceforth, the Internet has now become a way of gauging the credibility of a democracy, or the way of gauging the shame of a dictatorship. We're at the beginning of this phenomenon. But this is going to grow and strengthen. I believe dictators that want to muzzle their people will no longer be able to do so with the Internet. They cannot do this. The international community will not remain silent. Things have changed to a much greater degree than we might think. And believe you me, I'm very aware of this. This had a big impact on our decision to intervene in Libya, which was not an easy decision to make.
Mademoiselle.
The young lady has a question. She'll be given the microphone.
Et après, monsieur.
The gentleman will speak after her.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, good morning. Estelle Balbour from the Economic School of Paris. I wanted your view on the meaning for putting on the G8, putting Internet on the G8 agenda. Why is it an appropriate forum to discuss the Internet? Because I don't think there are minimum rules having to do with national economics. Let me say this. It was extraordinary to say that Internet got rid of borders, abolished borders. Internet has gotten rid of borders, has broadened space. But we can't say that and at the same time act like laws, rules governing Internet were just domestic and values were just national. So I was thinking, the Internet is very powerful in the most powerful economies. Now, what does the G8 boil down to? Aside from China, these are the biggest economies worldwide. So the idea was, at the G8, couldn't we try to find common positions, harmonize our views on the Internet? So bring this into the international sphere, not keep it within the national sphere. National regulations, national discussions, what impact do they have on a borderless Internet, a global Internet? It's meaningless to just discuss these at a domestic level, which is why I think we should start with the G8, go to the G20 at some time in the future, and end up at the UN General Assembly, because we're talking about a global phenomenon. Global values, therefore, a foundation of global rules. Otherwise, it would be meaningless. This is why I wanted to put this on the G8's agenda. I felt as heads of state and government, it made perfect sense for us to begin looking into these questions and have a firmer, full understanding of your world. It gets things interesting, after all. And it makes for a change. You know, I think heads of state and government need to be talking about the future, not just the past. I mean, we certainly bring forward the history of our countries. Our countries come from somewhere. History started, and we're part of an overall process, a historical process. We realize that. And we do certainly very often talk about the past and talk about the present. But we probably don't talk enough about the future. And you are the future. I wanted for there to be this coming together. I wanted the heads of state and government to be talking about the future. Some people said that I wanted to control things. Can you imagine for 1 second I would think that might be possible? That wouldn't be possible. And I also think it's important for you to have your voices heard, to be listened to. I've met with many people who voiced fears that due to some awkwardness or lack of knowledge, we might make decisions that might complicate or even ruin some of the work being done by your businesses. So there's a global aspect, plus the idea we wanted to have discussions. We wanted to talk about these points. We wanted to see if we could sort of speak some common language. And I think this will be very beneficial, very useful. And the fact that so many of you have come here goes to show this was true. My colleagues and I are very interested. And the colleagues have wondered, how's this going to work out? What are you be doing? What are we going to talk about? And I said, we'll see. Things mustn't be decided on in advance. We have to let things go their own path.
Après, yes.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président. Je m'appelle Jeff Jarvis from
I'm Jeff Jarvis, University of New York.
You say that, acknowledge that the government does not own the internet, yet we see governments trying to claim sovereignty there. A U.S. Official calls the internet an eighth continent. It is a new land. And what makes it free and open is its very structure of being distributed and open. And so as you go to the G8, I have one small request. I think this discussion is wonderful. I think this discussion about principles and the internet and shared understanding and potential is very much what we need. But I would ask of government to take a Hippocratic oath for the internet, and that is first, do no harm.
Oui, honnêtement, c'est pas très difficile.
Well, honestly, it's not difficult to answer that question. Do no harm. Absolutely. I mean, why should you think we would harm you? You've got tremendous potential for growth and knowledge. It's extraordinary. I like the expression, the eighth continent. But what do you mean by harm? I will certainly pay very close attention to this. Now, do you mean that bringing up the matter of security from terrorism is a question of harm? Is that harmful? Or if we say to you, you are creative people, what you've created has to be protected, respected, and we have to also respect and protect other creators, is that harmful to you? If we say, you wanted the eighth continent to be the continent of freedom and openness, we say, though, we mustn't give rise to new monopolies. Is that harmful? We can say there's sacred universal values, such as protecting a child from some predatory nature of some adults. Is that harmful to you? I do not think so. I think what would be harmful to you would be to not recognize that you are responsible, competent people, good citizens, good global citizens, shouldering their responsibilities. What would be harmful to you would be to not even bring up the issue, being afraid you wouldn't understand it. You've understood the future so well, are certainly fully capable of understanding this matter. So if I'm to do a Hippocratic oath of doing you no harm, yes, I would accept that oath. I could even say to you, I like you, and I'd rather the sunshine than the rainfall. I'd rather businesses making money than businesses losing money. It's great being here, but ask for stronger commitments on my part. And what I can say to you, and I'm convinced that for my colleagues, heads of state and government, the same holds true. We're fully aware of the power of the Internet, and at the same time, the fragility of the overall Internet ecosystem. We mustn't enact any measures that would complicate the development of this system. I agree with you fully. Yes, indeed. And I think with the best intentions, we could make for problems. So we have to be very careful. So I think in this market that you are creating, which hasn't yet stabilized, we have to be very careful, think things through carefully before taking a decision. The idea of regulating once and for all is ill-suited to your economy. We have to be very pragmatic, move forward, evolve, use our experience, learn from it. We must decide to do nothing rather than do the wrong thing. Better to hold back in this sector of growth and therefore instability. So that's my oath that I'd certainly be prepared to adhere to. And let me say that the fact that so many of you came is a good sign, because if you felt that it weren't meaningful, you wouldn't have come. I really do believe it's extremely important for us to continue this dialogue and mutual respect. Believe me, what we want, heads of state and government, is to make no mistake in your area and your economy, which is a work in progress, which is very fragile, which is very powerful at the same time. We do not want to create any instability. Shall we change a sector?
Bonjour, Good
morning, Tyke Cream, a business person. Good morning, Mr. President. In your opinion, how can the Internet change the way government administrations work? Well, you know, as head of state, my team spends more time finding out what's being said on the Internet than finding out what's being said in the newspapers. So a tremendous change has taken place. Previously, the first time I was minister, we used to wait for the big evening newspapers to come out to find out what they were writing about. Now, the big evening newspaper is the Internet every second. 3 a.m., night and day. There's no such thing as Sunday or weekend anymore. And there's no longer a May Day in France where there's no press publications, because Internet's always on. So things have changed completely. And let me also say, and this is certainly a good thing, good change, this has meant each country has had to be less inward-looking, had less of a domestic focus, because information is global. So for us, it's been a sea change. but it's not finished yet, not complete yet. We're still understanding, still in the learning curve, still trying to lag behind as little as possible. So we have to all show great humility. We know that the changes are continuing to take place.
Mr.
President, good morning. I'm the chair of the All Africa Global Media Group for African and the African Media Initiative. President, every year this year you're going to meet with African heads of state at the G8. It's been like that since 2000. President, can we depend on you not only to explain to them that Internet is a growth driver, but also an extraordinary tool in the world of democratic governance, and therefore it's not a sector which represents enemies. We can see this in many countries. We're not investing in infrastructure which is going to develop the sector, and very often, in actual fact, we go back to what the gentleman was saying. They do harm. They block the growth and development of the sector. So, President, can we depend on you to convey this message? Thank you, President. Well, you know, the African continent will have 2 billion inhabitants in the next 30 to 40 years. Of the 2 billion, there are over 70% who will be aged under 20. Africa is the youth of the world. Who would be foolish enough to think that the Africans would not be the first to seek to develop Internet? So you can depend on us, and I will tell them, and they know it anyway. And in that same vein, in Africa as elsewhere, the old reactions, reflexes, are over. Nobody can control now or stop Internet. So perhaps there'll be North Korea for some time to come with a madman who pushes his country back to the Middle Ages. But Africa is 12 kilometers away through the Straits of Gibraltar. So Internet will spread like wildfire, and Internet draws knowledge, growth, the aspiration to democracy. So those who seek to stop that will be swept aside. I'm absolutely convinced of that, and I would add for the development of Africa, and in particular for all those children who require training, education, the vector for the dissemination of knowledge for the teachers in Africa, this vector is an essential one. So you should not have any doubt whatsoever as to the power of this revolution which is underway. And before leaving you, I would like to say how grateful I am to you for having accepted this meeting. It wasn't easy for us to open up, but I suppose it wasn't easy for you to accept this invitation and to go along with this. But let's ensure that nobody is disappointed. Thank you, President.